Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to the UX world, where today we're going to be discussing something that we haven't yet discussed. On the podcast in the past, we've spoken a lot about voice app development, skill development, action development, and how you can create kind of standalone third-party apps within the voice environment on Alexa, Google Home, etc., etc. We have covered some VUI stuff outside of that, but what we haven't done is we haven't covered the other side of these virtual assistants, digital assistants, and smart speakers, which is the search function. So whenever you ask Alexa a question, or you ask Google Home or Google Assistant a question, and it gives you an answer directly, how does it do that? And how, as a brand or as a content creator or as a developer or whatever your kind of interest is in this space, how can you utilize that native search to then either provide value to users or to establish a presence on voice? So we're going to be talking today all about voice search, the current situation, the current state of play, as well as the future for voice search as well. And to guide us through it, we have, I think probably, if I could pick a person to take us through this from a Google perspective, I couldn't have found a better person to take us through it. We are going to be speaking today to Dr. Pete Myers, who is a marketing scientist from Moz.com. If you don't know about Moz.com, I'm sure we'll find out a lot more about Moz during the course of this podcast, but Moz essentially is the industry leader for SEO tooling and knowledge, and Dr. Pete has been a part of the Moz team for a long time. He's done a lot of writing and studies. If you kind of read on digital content marketing and SEO, you'll have come across his work. And now he's working with Moz on the product side. I don't think there's a person on the planet who knows Google better than Dr. Pete. So we're going to get right up and close and into detail about Google Home, Google Assistant, Google Search, and the whole voice search landscape. And we're going to do that right now. So, hello there, Dr. Pete.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be here.
Fantastic for you to join us. Really, really appreciate you taking the time out to speak to us today. As I mentioned in the intro there, we've covered a lot of stuff around app development on this podcast. We haven't covered things around search, voice search in particular, and your experience is vast in this space. Do you want to tell people a little bit about your background and your experience and what you've been up to and how you've got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. We'll try and keep the shorter version of how I got where I am. I'm closer to 50 than 40, so it's been a long journey. I'm the marketing scientist for Moz, and long story short, when I joined Moz full time, I've been part of the site from a content perspective for about 10 years, but I've been full time with them for about 5. I was trying to decide whether to be part of the marketing team or the data science team at the time. And I decided to split my time, which turned out great. And so I essentially study where Google is headed, the trends in Google, and I use that from both the marketing perspective for Moz and more now the last couple of years from a product perspective to try and help understand where our product needs to be in the next 2 to 3 years, sometimes honestly in the next year, the way things are moving. And we're a marketing analytics package for search marketers. So a lot of this is about what is coming. Things do seem to be moving fast. So what's happening? What do our customers need to be aware of? What do they need to adapt to? And, voice right now is a big part of that. We're seeing these appliances launch. We're seeing more and more voice search on our phones. And, what do companies need to be doing? So that's what we're trying to figure out.
Fantastic. And for those people who may not be aware of Moz, you mentioned in terms of some of the tooling that it provides, it also provides a hell of a lot of content as well, and guidance and education in the area that you've just kind of covered in analytics and search and things like that. If somebody hadn't heard about Moz, how would you describe Moz? How would you describe the company and what it does?
Yeah, it's funny. We came out of that. Essentially, when we launched, we were a consulting firm in the search marketing space, organic search marketing as opposed to paid. SEO, as some of us say. And yeah, we really started out with heavy educational content, and Rand Fishkin, our founder, his blog, and built up from there. And that's really what drew me into the company. And that's still a big focus for us, is on educating the industry and doing the research and kind of seeing where things are headed. And then we help customers, track campaigns, track rankings, track links, things like that, and manage their organic search campaigns better. But, like anyone, we're trying to get into that layer of not just providing you these numbers, but trying to help provide you with these insights about, look, what do I do now? What kind of things should I be producing, and how do I get prepared for these next steps? And I think it's scary for a lot of people, because we know the mobile revolution. We've talked about it for a decade, but it's here. It's here and gone. We are mobile, and voice is coming, and these things are happening. And people don't just want to know where they rank on Google and how much traffic they got. They want to know what they have to do next. And so, we're trying to, both from a content perspective and a product perspective, try and sort out how we solve that.
And in terms of kind of where it goes next, you've mentioned the kind of the rising trend of voice searches and stuff like that. I come across an article in Forbes, and I'll link to that in the show notes. It was by a guy called Jason Demers, and one of the quotes in there is that he says that we're on the verge of a full-scale search revolution in the next few years because of the rise of these voice-first devices and voice-first digital assistants. What do you make of that, Dr. Pete, and would you agree with that or not?
It's tough. Yes and no is the short answer. I think voice is serious. I think voice is real, and it is going to change things a lot. But what I think the danger of that statement to me, and no offense to Jason, but I hear it a lot, and this is something I worry about. I think in our heads we have this feeling that we're moving from desktop to mobile to voice. And the way we think about that, if you kind of look at the graph in our minds, what that means is that in so many years, however many years, we're going to be 100% voice. And I think that's completely false. I think what we're moving to is a multi-device, multimodal world where we have journeys across multiple devices. When we move from our phones to our laptop to voice, where it's appropriate, and where these devices are going to start to find their niche. And voice is going to be a big part of that. If you're in the kitchen working, if you're in the car driving, whatever, even if the car is driving itself, you may not have that screen with you. There are going to be places where voice makes a lot of sense, and we're going to have to compete on voice. And there are going to be other places where we still need that screen. And sometimes it's going to be a big screen. Sometimes it's going to be a small screen. And we're not going to ever end up with everything on one modality. Nothing is going to be 100% served by images or by voice. And so the interesting thing to me, and I think the very challenging things and where the revolution will come, is that we have to get away from this thought process of we have, desktop customers and mobile customers and voice customers, and realize that everyone is involved in a journey that's going to take them across all of these devices. And we have to understand, where are they starting and where are they ending? And are we giving them a rich experience cross device? And I think voice and the voice user experience are going to be a huge part of that, because if I have this great, even now, if I have this great desktop website, but a lousy mobile website and a lousy voice experience, and people aren't engaging in this cross-device journey, that one good experience won't be enough. And so I think that's where the revolution is going to come, and where our shift in thinking is going to come. What I don't think is going to happen is that we're going to move down this pathway that ends in everything is voice, and nothing has a screen. I think even if we say that out loud, we kind of go, yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think I seen, funnily enough, it was one of the Moz videos. I think it was one of the Whiteboard Fridays that Rand Fishkin used to do, and it was saying, it was kind of focusing on voice search, and it was actually saying that search in general just typical search, screen-based typed search, is actually still growing pretty heavily every single year, and that voice search, although it will be growing alongside it, won't necessarily replace it, possibly even ever, but certainly not for quite some time.
Yeah, one thing interesting we saw with mobile searches is I think a year or so ago, mobile searches hit half of all Google searches were mobile, according to Google. So I don't know what the exact number is now. But what we saw was until about a year or two ago, the amount of desktop searches didn't go down. So what happened was we added mobile searches, and they become a big part of the mix and very important. We can't ignore them at all. But they didn't replace desktop searches. They just added. They just were more. And at some point that stops. At some point one is going to start to cannibalize the other one, and they're going to level out. But one didn't really replace the other. It just became yet another thing we did, and to have that thing in our pocket all the time. And I see it with voice, and I'm a late adopter sometimes, but now that I do certain things with voice, they just make sense to me. Things I do in the car, like send a text or ask my phone how long it's going to take till I get home. This has become much more second nature, but it's also, I just didn't do that before. You know what I mean? Like, that's an added thing that I do now that I have voice that I wouldn't have done because I didn't have my hands, and I just didn't do anything before. So now it's, I'm getting used to making this an additional search task that I do. And essentially I'm adding more searches to my life because they work and they're providing value.
That's interesting. So it's kind of almost created a new requirement for search on top of our existing kind of search behavior. That's quite interesting. So that's probably kind of speaks to your point, doesn't it, in terms of the multimodality side of things, and perhaps that people won't necessarily be replacing a typical search with a voice search. It may be that the voice search is actually being used in a time where they can't type, as you mentioned, in the car or something like that.
Yeah, I'll give you an example in the car because I discovered this the other day. So I have the usual like windscreen mounted GPS, Garmin. I think I have a Garmin. And slowly I've started to use my phone. I have a Pixel phone. I've started to use that instead because it's better. It just works better and it's more useful. So I've got that screen. I've got one screen on the windscreen and one screen in my lap, which is probably not the safest way to drive. I need to do something about that. But I discovered the other day that I could ask the phone, even if I wasn't navigating, how long until I get home. And so, I've got that map going and the screen is doing something, but that interaction of, hey, how much longer till I get home is a new interaction. You know what I mean? So that isn't replacing that map that I'm looking at. It's just something new that I figured out I can do. Or the phone is navigating and a song comes on the radio and I say, tell me what that song is. That's a new interaction that I didn't have before. And so it didn't replace anything. And, some things are going to be replaced, but I think it's interesting that what's actually happening is that we're discovering new functionality for search and new skills that search didn't have before. And there's still a lot of potential there. So, I think there's still a lot of search volume undiscovered in a sense, because we're realizing search can do new and interesting things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also as you mentioned, that if you're starting to use voice searches more and more, I'm certainly starting to use it more and more, and us two are people who are, I would class, and certainly on your part, heavily involved in this industry, and I'm kind of trying to do my piece along the way. So if that's kind of two people who you probably think of as kind of certainly early in this kind of space, then only, you can only imagine what will happen when, people's parents are starting to use voice. Like if my mum whipped out her phone now and asked Siri how to get home or something like that, I'd be absolutely astonished. But I didn't think she'd ever use I didn't think she'd ever use Facebook, but she's on it like I don't know what. So I think eventually,
we say that, and then in a year from now we'll be home for Christmas, and that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting too. I have two young kids; they're 7 and 5, and we have Alexa and Google Home in the house, and the way it's the way I've come to think of it is, I grew up, I was born in 1970. I grew up in the 80s, early personal computers, 8088 processors, things like that. People my age had to learn dumb search, what I call it. We couldn't use natural language. We had to learn to type these 2 and 3 word queries that were kind of stupid sounding because search wasn't very smart. And now we're having to relearn natural language in a sense. We're having to relearn that search engines are capable of understanding what we're talking about. My kids are voice native in a sense. They expect voice to work. And so they don't type in things like plan wedding London. The kind of weird things that we would say because we grew up with this dumb search. They just ask, and so it's very interesting to me that even though we're search people and so we're early adopters in the sense of having to understand these capabilities, I think there is a generation right now that just walks up to machines and asks them questions and expects them to know the answer. And so, as that generation becomes larger, in ages, and as the machines get smarter, that's when that revolution will come. And it's interesting because they do, they're another market where search is just being added. If my daughter's working on her homework and she doesn't know how to spell a word, she just asks Alexa. If she wants to know how big a planet is or how many days to her birthday, they just ask Alexa, and they use it a little more than Google Home just because of the way we're set up at home. But these were things they asked me, as if I could just calculate in my head, exactly how many days to his birthday 8.5 months from now, or knew how big the sun was off the top of my head. And I don't want to disillusion anyone that I don't know all that instantly, but yeah, it's funny that now they weren't using search engines. They don't know how to use a keyboard. My 7-year-old sort of does now, but they didn't use Google. But they'll walk up to these machines and they'll ask questions, and so that's the search ecosystem they're going to grow up in.
And that then presumably presents a heck of a lot of challenges for the companies behind these search engines. So let's use the Google example. I know that you're kind of more than au fait with Google and how it all kind of works and hangs together and stuff like that. In your kind of vision that you just kind of explained there, where you're voice searching in the car, you might kind of type on a desktop and you might kind of do a mobile search while you're walking around or what have you, in this kind of multimodal environment. How does a company like Google cope with processing all of these different search queries across all of these different modalities?
Right. It's extremely challenging. I think, and Alexa, what Amazon has done and what Google has done are very different. And I know more about what Google's done, obviously. I think what Google has done is tried to use its core capabilities and its core engine to serve everything and to make things less device dependent. And we don't always see it, but the way Google views the user experience, in a sense, to really oversimplify it, if you go to do a search and you see that thing we sometimes call you see any result, whether it's an ad or an organic result, but now we see those little answer boxes, we call them, at the top. In Google's vernacular, those are all cards. And different devices hold a different number of cards. And so on desktop, we have that 10 card mentality, right? We have 10 results. That's not true always anymore, but that's the way we think. And we might have that thing in the right-hand panel. On mobile, we lose that right-hand panel, or it moves to the bottom. And tablet is more like mobile. But we might have less cards, or we might have more and have to scroll.
So my cards, just to confirm for those who may not be aware, cards, as you're explaining it there, are you talking about search results, or are you talking about that kind of like featured snippet at the top that'll have the answer to the question within it?
So basically, although we don't think of it this way visually because that's not how the design is, in Google's mind, and if you look at the source code, everything is a card.
Okay.
So all a card is a single search information unit.
Mm-hmm.
And that search information unit might be an ad, or it might be an organic result, or it might be that answer box.
Okay.
And I think the world we're moving towards is a very flexible framework where Google can mix and match that information however the device allows. And that might not just mean voice, but your Google Watch, where you've only got room for one card. And voice, you've basically got room for one card. And mobile, you've got a little more space, and desktop, you've got a lot of space. And so I think Google is trying to figure out, both from a back-end perspective and from a UX perspective, how do we take our core competence in search, this huge index of the web, all your websites, all the information we got from them, our knowledge graph, this kind of fixed database of facts, and all advertising, of course, and send that to any place that makes sense. And so they're trying to develop a much more flexible engine using that core power they already have. And then on the flip side, and we saw this in desktop search, the Hummingbird update, the algorithm update we call the Hummingbird update, Google made a big shift towards natural language. And that capability was driven by voice and was driven by mobile, but it also changed how search works on desktop. So that's what we're seeing. Google is becoming more mobile first. They're becoming voice first when that makes sense. But that's actually changing all of their products all the way back to desktop. So they're trying to apply this knowledge and apply these capabilities across everything, but they're being forced to move more and more towards a device-independent framework and towards natural language, because that's where we're headed.
Mm. So when you say natural language, do you mean because for a long time when you put in a search term, you would say things like or the or into or something like that. All of those would be kind of called stop words, wouldn't they? And kind of discounted from the search. Are you saying, do you mean by natural language processing, do you mean that those words would all be considered as part of one search query kind of thing?
Right. Instead of saying something like, Mother's Day date, we're more likely to say something like, when is Mother's Day? Or Mother's Day 2018. We might have typed something like that. And so what we're seeing is that not only do we use that more natural, long form of a question in voice and mobile, but we're actually starting to type those more frequently too, because we're just getting used to them working. Whereas before they didn't always work, or they weren't any different than the short version. So yeah, I think we're just adapting to that being how we phrase all searches, some of us. And especially as we use, there's voice in the sense of the voice appliance where it's talking back to me. And there's voice in the sense of just your phone where you might ask the question with voice, but still have that screen. So I think they're getting used to that. We're getting used to just using longer queries and using natural language all the time.
Mm. And for those people who are kind of thinking, who may not come from the search world and who are either developers on the kind of digital assistant side of things, or people who are focusing predominantly on these kind of smart speakers, if you were to search, and I think you kind of answered this question, but I want to try and figure out what the difference is. If you were to search on, let's say, Google Home, and you were to ask Google Home a question, I think some people might not think that we're performing a search there. They might just think that they're asking Google a question and Google's giving them the answer. But when you ask a question on Google Home, is that actually performing the same kind of search as you would perform if you were on a desktop and then serving the same search results back? Or is it doing something different?
For the most part, it is. And so that it depends. So I can give you a few examples. But the good news is that, yes, because Google is using that same core knowledge and same core engine, the things we do to rank on desktop and the things we do to rank on mobile are actually helping us be voice answers as well. And so there's a couple different varieties of this right now. So we have basically two kinds of answers in search. We have what we call knowledge cards, and I mean a specific kind of card, but knowledge boxes, which come from the knowledge graph. So the knowledge graph is Google's fact base A lot of it comes from Wikidata. There are some other sources. This is coming straight from Google, and we can't really do much with it. So these are informational searches. So I'll give you an example. If you ask a question like, when is Prince Harry's wedding? You're going to get my American view of what people care about in the UK. You get the, if you do that on desktop, you'll get the date back, May 19th, 2018.
Yeah.
If you ask Google the same thing, I have a Google Home here, so I'm afraid to actually say the trigger words for the Google Home. But if you ask that same question, you will get that fact and some surrounding text back on Google Home. That doesn't really do you any good because that's kind of a closed information source. But there's another kind of answer that we call a featured snippet, and that's basically where Google takes the organic results, the things we try to rank for in organic search marketing and SEO, and picks one and puts it in an answer box. And so it's an answer and a link to the site, just like you would have with organic. So if you ask kind of a more complicated question, like the one I was playing with was, how much money does the Queen have? Well, that's kind of there's not an easy answer for that, right? It depends who you talk to. You get back a featured snippet. And in this case, I get back one from independent.co.uk. If you ask on voice, you'll get that featured snippet. So it's strange for a search marketing perspective because it's not an organic result in the typical sense that you linked. But Google Home will say something like, according to independent.co.uk, in 2011, Forbes estimated the British royal family's net worth, et cetera, et cetera. And so it'll take that same answer and convert it to a voice-friendly format and give the site attribution. And then what's interesting is that if you go to the app, the link is actually there in the app. And that's a little hidden, but I think what we're going to see is that you're going to ask that question on voice, you're going to get that information back with the attribution, and you'll be able to maybe send that result to your laptop or your desktop or your phone and just tell it, oh, I want to learn more about that. And so there is going to be, we're going to actually travel back the other direction, and there's going to be a marketing value to having your answers there. But the good news is that it's coming from that same engine. So you don't have to go build a Google Home app or an Alexa app. You can if you want to. But the same things that you're doing right now to answer questions in desktop and mobile search are giving you exposure in voice. And so, in a sense, it's a shift to an answer-driven mentality instead of a purely keyword-driven mentality. But there are some ways we can get payoff on voice right now just by doing what we already do well.
Because that would make sense in terms of the next step would be to send those results from that voice-only device to your phone or whatever if you wanted to learn more. Because that would kind of get over the thing that I've found recently, which was, I just read about this, so those kind of answer boxes that would give you the answer there and then within the search results page, as opposed to making you go to the website to see it. Didn't like a load of websites see a massive drop in traffic after Google introduced that feature? I'm sure I read that.
So it depends. So we've seen it go both ways. When Google answers a definitive question, like it used to be, if you asked a question like, when is Mother's Day or when is Prince Harry's wedding, you'd get a bunch of websites. Now you just get that answer from the knowledge graph. That's a definitive answer, and click-through rates on those SERPs, we're doing a new study now. Click-through rates drop off a lot on those searches. But when you ask a more open-ended question, and something like, how much money does the Queen have? There's still kind of an answer, so it depends how much you care. But, if you do something like, I looked up, if I'm planning a party for the royal wedding and I say, recipes for party food, or how do I plan for party food? Then you tend to get back these more interesting answers that are things like lists. And so what we see in those searches and what we see with featured snippets in general is that done right, they're kind of a teaser of the content. And if people are interested, they're going to follow up because they're not things that can be easily answered. Because anything that can be easily factually answered is going to be eventually sort of taken away by Google. if it's how tall was Margaret Thatcher, like that, that's just a fact, right? And that can be, if that's your business model to answer questions like that, your time might be short in search. But for questions like, how do I paint my house? A few bullet points or a paragraph is only going to be kind of a teaser of the information. And so I think that's where we need to focus right now. And where voice isn't going to be adequate, so we're going to get that information. We're going to go, oh, okay, that seems authoritative, or that seems like a decent answer. Send that to my phone or send that to my laptop. I want to look at the whole article. And so we're actually seeing decent click-through rates with featured snippets, because it really is kind of suggesting that, hey, this is an authoritative answer. We're putting this in this box and saying it's worth you looking at, but you're probably going to have more questions. This isn't an easy answer or something that we can just throw out there. It's not a date or a name or a metric that you're just done. It's something that's going to take some exploration. And so I don't think people should be afraid of those answers. I think we also don't have a choice. If it's you in that box or your competitor in that box, you hiding your head and not being in that box isn't going to help you that much. So,
wicked.
And I think the other challenge from a search, that card challenge in a sense, is that if you're on desktop and you're ignoring that box, there's still organic results below it, and you're saying, oh, I'm number 1 or 2 or 3. If you're on voice and you're ignoring that box, there's no answers after that first one. So I think what's interesting about voice right now, and the challenge, is that the organic results are there, and you can say, oh, well, I'm number 2. I've still got something. If you're on voice and you're not that answer, that's it. That's the only answer people are going to get. And so that one card competition is much, much higher. And so I think that's why people do need to care, and they can't really be too afraid of these boxes, however they feel about them. And, I think it's understandable to be cautious. Once we get to voice, or once we get to mobile, that box at the top is just so much more valuable real estate than it is on desktop. And, we're going to have to figure out what that means. And I do think once that flexibility is built in, once things are moving between devices, we're going to be a little less afraid of it. But now it kind of feels like, oh, I don't get a link. I don't know what to do. Well, you got something.
Yeah.
It's better than nothing. And it's happening whether we like it or not. That's where I'm usually at with Google.
Yeah.
We can dislike it all we want. It's not going to change anything.
So, is that how you think that Google is prioritizing those different types of questions? Is that purely factual based stuff comes from the knowledge graph, and more open-ended questions come from potentially that number 1 kind of answer box on the featured snippet side?
I think they have to. Yeah, I think this has happened if you look at directories in the early days of search, or if you look at some of the search engines that tried to be different than Google or be fact-based, you can't curate information at that rate. Even Wikipedia, they cannot answer every question. And so eventually Google said, you know what, we have this entire index of the web. We have to be able to generate answers from it. And so, I think that, yes, the things they can answer fact-based, they will try to do that, and that's going to expand, but they're never going to be able to answer everything that way. And even if it's fact-based, in a sense, they can't keep up with the rate of change of the web. There's new things happening every day. There's new facts every day. There's new information. When they discovered the one exoplanet that got a lot of news, TRAPPIST-7 or TRAPPIST-9, I can't remember what it's called. If you went the next day, there were featured snippets about that. They can't maintain curated data at that rate. So I think I don't know if that's what they want to do. I think if Google could own all that data and answer all our questions with just what they own, they would be fine with that, but that's not possible. So yes, I think there's always going to be that split. And there will always be questions that you can't answer easily, and over time, some of those are going to be lists and some of those are going to be videos, and, it's going to depend on the kind of question you have. And we see that on voice. If you ask something on voice, I think you can ask it some things on YouTube and then send the video to your TV via Chromecast. So now you've actually kind of done the journey in reverse, because Google Home is going to say, well, I can't show you a video, and you probably don't want to just hear the video. So let's not do that. And on the flip side, if you go on mobile and you look up a recipe, and this is now sort of a closed information source, Google is going to say, oh, well, maybe you should send that recipe to Google Home, because you're not going to have your hands while you're making this. So let's put it on Google Home. And actually, I did that query, that recipes for party food, I get a featured snippet on desktop, but if I do that on Google Home, it has a recipe database and it says, hey, I found a recipe. Do you want to hear it? And so, we're going to see some of that too, where voice is different than desktop sometimes. So there's a challenge. We have to be aware. We have to be trying these things out. I had one the other day where I was doing some research. I ended up asking Google how to bake a ham, and it said I have a recipe I have a recipe from recipes.com or someone called Awesome Baked Ham. Would you like to make that? And I didn't answer, and I was busy doing something, and it prompts you. And so it just kept prompting me, would you like to make awesome baked ham? Like every 30 seconds, would you like to make awesome baked ham? I'm like, all right, settle down, Google.
Yeah.
I'm not insulting your ham, but yeah, so it is funny. They are going to try and do some things differently with voice, but it's only going to be where there's enough interest and enough money and enough reason to do that.
And speaking of different things being shown on kind of voice search results versus desktop-based results or mobile-based results, you did a wicked article which I'll link to in the show notes called "Lessons from 1,000 Voice Searches on Google Home." That was from last year. We won't have a chance to cover the whole thing, but there was a few things in there in terms of those differences that you mentioned. In terms of you don't really want to hear the audio from a video on your smart speaker. You might want to send that to your phone. And one of the other interesting ones was all about results that return tables. I wonder whether you can kind of touch on that a little bit. So the example in the article is if you search for what generation am I, it will give you a table which will be baby boomer generation from this date to that date and generation X from this date to that date. How does that kind of work on voice, and what kind of challenges do those kind of things present?
Yeah, I think that's going to be interesting from a general UX standpoint. So for the featured snippets, right now, there are basically four kinds. There's kind of that regular paragraph answer that we're used to. There are bullet lists, which Google can create from basically any content, but where they decide a list is the best answer. There are tables, where they essentially extract the table from the site and reformat it. So that example you gave is one. I think I saw one that was like Starbucks prices, and it went to the site and it looked up the different drinks and put the drinks in one column and the prices in one column. Where it just kind of made sense to put that in a tabular format. And then there are featured videos, which are kind of their own thing, but are also a featured snippet of a sort. So paragraphs, short paragraphs, and sometimes Google will just pick part of it, make perfect sense on voice. Short lists make sense. And you'll see that Google truncates a lot of the lists. So it's just a couple words and ... and the ellipsis. That kind of works on voice, and steps work on voice to a point if it doesn't get too long. But you can't really read a table. They haven't really found a great way to do that. And that's not a Google problem. That's just a voice experience problem. And you can't really read a video. You can read a transcript. You can read a table, but it doesn't. Well, you lose the spatial aspect of it, So it's really hard to tell unless you find a way to kind of translate. So right now, what we're seeing is if on desktop you get a table, sometimes Google and does a paragraph on voice, or so they're trying to figure it out. Like sometimes the formats they use for desktop just won't fit voice very well. So how do they simplify that? How do they become smarter. And this is Google, so they want to automate that. They want to find a way that works most of the time for that kind of answer. And so right now what you're seeing is that you don't get a lot of table-based answers because they don't really know what to do with them on mobile and voice. But over time, I think they're going to go, hey, you know what? There are some ways we can do this, and they're going to sort it out. So yeah, that'll be interesting. Or they're just going to give a different answer. And the funny thing is that answer actually comes from a different site. So it is a featured snippet, but it's just not one you're seeing on desktop.
That's interesting. So let's you mentioned that the potential for that multimodality stuff in terms of searching for one thing on a voice-only platform and then getting, sending those results to another device, and the benefits in general of featuring in those featured snippets and having your answer returned on voice, because you do get the accreditation on Google Home, as you mentioned. So, here's what I found on recipes.com or whatever. Thinking about brands and companies and content creators and people who are trying to kind of create and get a presence and establish a presence on this kind of rising new search kind of medium, what would your sort of advice be for featuring as a search result on voice-first platforms?
Yeah, a couple things. I think in the SEO space, we're kind of used to thinking of keyword targeting, and we're very much, it's all about like which keywords are going to generate the most traffic for me. And I think the shift we have to make with voice and with natural language in general is to think more in terms of answering questions. And doing keyword research around it and building content around answering questions. And that can, we have to be careful because we could do that in a low quality way. I think answering questions for our visitors has value. On Moz, we have the blog, of course, but we also have a permanent resource called the Learning Center. And so, we have articles like what is a title tag that get a massive amount of traffic because they answer these basic questions that people want to know. And that those kind of permanent resources that are question and answer focused are very good fodder for featured snippets. And what's interesting is, even though this is kind of a move to natural language, if you don't have to type that question, what is a title tag? That same content could rank for just title tag or some of these more attractive traditional queries. So we're not replacing one with the other, but I think it's just a different way to think about content in general. The other thing that I've pushed people towards, again, I don't want to oversimplify, but I think it's just a good thing to think about. In journalism, there's a method of writing, a structure of writing called the reverse pyramid. And the idea of the reverse pyramid is just get your premise out right at the beginning and then expand on it. Get their attention right away and give your argument. This is what I think, and then tell why. From a search perspective, what I would say is this: get your answer right out there. If your page is, what is a title tag, or, whatever it is in your industry, even a how-to kind of thing, get sort of the basic structure of the answer there right away and then expand. And so with some of our pages, like what is a title tag? Well, we give that answer, but then we talk about how do I craft a title tag and how long can my title tag be, and how do I put keywords in my title tag responsibly, and how do I do this for SEO? And we get into those sub-questions on that same very rich page, but that basic answer is at the top. And then we let people dig deeper and deeper and deeper. I think people are afraid to do this because they're afraid to give the value away. But what I'm going to argue is this: first of all, web visitors already have a very short attention span. I mean, we have a vanity that they're going to read our entire thing, no matter how long it is, and we know that's not true. And so I think we need to cater to that. We need to give them what they want right away. But if we give them to that credibly, if we give a question that really can't be easily answered, because what is a title tag is a complex question. You know what I mean? There's an easy answer, but then the answer I'm probably looking for is, how do I write one? or what do they mean for SEO? Or I have another question in mind. And so what we see is they look at that featured snippet and they say, you know what, this seems good. This helps me. This seems like a good site, but I need to know more than this. And then when they hit your page, they see UX sometimes call that scent trail. Same comfort of, yes, they're not trying to trick me. And then they see that new information and that richer information. And so, I think this is good for visitors. I think it's good for conversion. It might not mean that everyone comes to that page, but the people who come to that page will be qualified, interested people. And, that's okay. That's a good thing. So I would really encourage people to think in terms of answers and think in terms of that reverse pyramid of, get the answer out there and then explain it and then show your expertise and then break out these sub-questions. The only thing I'll warn is that if you're in an industry where these questions can be very easily answered, these time and date sites, they're gone. Their revenue is gone. The sites that you would ask, when is Easter this year? That's answered now. The sites that would tell you how old a celebrity is, they're gone. So, I think this has to be rich answers. They have to be answers that Google can't easily replace. Even lyrics, if you're doing song lyrics, so Google has those now. So, we have to be careful. So if your answers are easy to come by, I think your days are numbered. So you have to be looking for those deeper, richer kind of questions and answering those. And if you get that voice answer, then that's a bonus right now. But I think that's also just good for search. It's good for visitors. Google's going to reward that.
Yeah. I'll just clarify that and make sure I've understood it properly. There was a slight little breakup on the internet connection side of things, which I thought might happen, only briefly. But just to clarify, then you're saying to write in the reverse pyramid style, so that you, in terms of the content structure, you come out with the question or the answer to the question immediately in the first paragraph, and hope that would rank in the featured snippet area, and that wouldn't diminish any website traffic, because more often than not, people are going to see that and then either have further questions or be interested in learning more. And then when they get there, you would then, underneath that opening title or opening paragraph that answers the question, you would then break that subject down a little bit more and give more background. That was the gist of what we were saying, wasn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And I think you only have to be careful where I was doing some research and I typed in something like, can I feed my hamster cheese? Well, that has an answer. You know what I mean? I don't know how deep I'm going to dig. But if I'm asking a question like, how do I find the perfect job? That's never going to be answered in a paragraph, but you could have a teaser or a core point, that you get right out there that gets them interested and pulls them into the deeper answer. So yeah, I think reverse pyramid is a great structure for that, because it gets that out there. And writing that is an art, writing that paragraph that doesn't give too much away, but is credible and plausible and draws people in and gives them good information. There's no easy way. That's not easy. That's art as much as science, but I think that kind of content is really valuable. And I'm not saying turn your whole site into an FAQ and churn out garbage, churn out 5,000 questions, which is how some people are doing it right now. But just think in terms of answering questions and valuable questions. Our learning center is a few dozen pages. We're a big site, so that's not a ton, but we really try and focus on those really important, frequent SEO questions that people ask and updating those every couple of years and having good information there and good research. So people come back, and we might put 4 or 5. What's interesting is we might put 4 or 5 sub questions on that same page, and those get snippets too. Right. So, it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be at the top of the page. I think that's a good structure that Google tends to reward if it's done well, but you can rank for those other questions in that long page too. So, I don't want people to run off and make every page like a 1-paragraph answer. I think there's value to this rich, deep content. and one page can rank for 5, 6 questions I've seen in some cases. So.
Cool. So is there any other tips then that you would give content creators or brands that are trying to establish a presence on voice by trying to get into that feature snippet section? You've got shifting focus maybe from keywords towards answering specific questions, and then in terms of how you answer that question, using that inverted pyramid structure, and then going from the high level answering the first question to get into more detail. Is there anything else that people should be looking at focusing on?
Yeah, I'd say 2 things. First, I should note that featured snippet does currently come from the first page of organic results. And the higher you are on the page, the more likely it is. So you still have to rank traditionally. You can't be number 75 and then get the featured snippet. So you still have to overcome that challenge of authority and relevance and ranking factors in general. So, this is a core SEO task in many ways. Before you just go rewriting all your content with no authority and no links and nobody cares about you. You're not going to magically appear on voice. And the other side is just that awareness. Things like those recipe searches. Every once in a while, Google is going to just step in, and we see this on desktop too. If you type in the title of a movie now, you get this rich answer box with the people in the movie and the information and the reviews. If you type in any sports team in the world, even some college and semi-pro, you type in the weather, we know there's certain niches Google has taken over. So you have to be aware of that on voice. There are certain things where Google is going to kind of step in and do their own thing. So don't invest a whole lot in a certain kind of content and find out that they've replaced that on voice. So, these devices, if you're an SEO team of any size, these devices aren't expensive. Especially if you get the little ones, to have an Echo Dot and a Google, what do they call the little Google one? I can't remember.
The Google Home Mini.
The Mini, yeah. So if a Home Mini and an Echo Dot, that's like $60 on our side of the pond for both of them. Just do it. Be aware. Kind of know what's going on.
So we've touched a lot on Google. I wonder whether, and I don't know whether this is a question that you can answer or whether this is common knowledge or not, but does Alexa's search work in a similar way then? Do you think they've got a knowledge base behind the scenes and then they're searching the web as well? Because I know that sometimes Alexa will say, here's something I found from XYZ. So is that using a search engine behind the scenes as well as Google is?
They do, but less. And they switched, didn't they? They used to use Bing. And am I thinking wrong on that they switched over? I can't remember if they switched now, but they were using Bing for a while. But they tend to focus on their own knowledge base more because they're really trying to drive. They have just a different structure in the sense that Amazon's trying to drive you to their ecosystem to buy things. Google doesn't have the same exact kind of ecosystem, so they're still trying to figure that out. So Amazon has kind of built it around their own apps and their own knowledge base. And, it's a mix. They do some things really well. My kids really like Alexa because, they're used to it. It answers a lot of basic questions. They can listen to music. So you have that tie into like the Amazon ecosystem. I listen to Audible on Alexa. But I think they're starting to trail in terms of that general question and answer capability. And all Alexa does is say, I found something. I think they say now something like, I found some information for you on the web. And sometimes they give you a little bit of that, and sometimes they just send it to the Alexa app, which right now is, I never open the Alexa app and look to see what they sent me. I'm just like, oh, you didn't answer that, and I move on, and I move on with my life. So I think that's going to be a challenge for them. They've done some of that, but they can't do that without partnering with Google or Bing. And now, obviously, Cortana, Microsoft is running Cortana. Microsoft has always had challenges in the device space, but they're spending solid money and effort on Cortana as a digital assistant, as an engine. They're building it into Windows. I can use Cortana on my desktop. I'm not really used to it. But they're making it a lot easier. Like Cortana is just kind of integrated in Windows 10 now. So, I think the hard part for Amazon is they don't have that. They don't have a search engine. So are they going to move towards their own knowledge base more and more, or are they going to have to rent that capability from someone else? And Apple's in the same boat. I think Siri has really fallen behind, honestly. And I switched. I used to be an iPhone user for years. But Siri kind of fell behind, and they don't have that same knowledge base that Microsoft and Google do. So I'm not sure what the future holds there. So Siri and Alexa are much more dependent on their own knowledge base. And so for marketers, there's less opportunity. Amazon apps, Alexa apps, obviously you can build. But from a search marketing aspect, there's less opportunity on those devices.
Yeah, 100%. I think I've heard loads of people say they've moved from an Apple phone to funnily enough, the phone that you're using, the Google Pixel or the Pixel 2. That's been lots of people I've spoke to have been into this space have got so sick and tired of Siri that they've moved phones because of it. So yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. I use Siri here and there. I use it for reminders and stuff like that, and I do still persevere with it only because I only upgraded my phone last September, and I don't really fancy getting rid of it after kind of like 8 months of using it or whatever. So I do persevere with it, but yeah, it is not fantastic. That answer to the last question, I've done a quick search there, and it turns out if there's a post on the Next Web from 2015 saying that Amazon Echo runs Bing. And then there's another post on Reddit, I don't know how reliable that's going to be, from January 2018, and apparently, according to Reddit, it still uses Bing, unless something's changed recently. That might explain some things.
Yeah, I heard an announcement, and then it didn't seem like anything changed, so I have a feeling that announcement was premature, so I'm not sure. But they don't really say, they used to actually say where the information came from, and now it says something like, I ran a search on the web, or according to some information I found on the web, and then just gives you the information. Then again, you can open the app, and I think you get a Bing search in the actual app. But they're trying not. They don't want to advertise that this isn't us. Yeah. So they don't. Yeah, they don't do it. They don't do it very well yet. I think Cortana eventually will be more like Google in the sense that that will tap Bing's index and Bing search results and operate in a similar way because they at least have that core capability. But I think it'll be challenging for Alexa and Siri. I think Amazon has a much more direct path to the money than Google and Microsoft do, so they're going to be okay for a while. I think actually Apple will have the most challenges, but from a pure marketing perspective, your easiest voice answers to compete for right now are on Google. And if you're going to get into the other ones, you're probably going to have to build apps. And obviously that's going to take more planning and more budget and some more thought about the trade-offs. It's worth doing sometimes, but you're going to have to think more about the trade-offs. I think the advantage of Google right now is that the things you already do well as a search marketer will benefit you on Google Home. And on Google Assistant on the phone as well.
Yeah, I suppose then so search marketers have got a real upper hand, haven't they, in terms of establishing a presence for their clients on Google. I think that the challenge will be for the people who are, ears have been pricked by this kind of new form of technology and trying to get then established on the native search part of these voice first kind of devices. Are going to have a lot bigger challenge ahead, I think.
Well, I think it's an easier argument in the sense of, you can go to your client or your boss and bring your Google Home or bring Google Assistant and say, oh, look, we ranked for voice. And they're going to go, oh, that's cool. How do we get more of that? And then you can say, well, we need to restructure our content a little bit. I'd like to try some things. I'm going to need a little time. I'm going to need a little budget. That's a much easier argument than, oh, Alexa is really taking off. We need to build an app, and I'm going to need $15,000 and an engineer. That's a really hard fight to win right now. So I think what's nice with Google Home, with that ecosystem, is you can kind of show some success without much time or budget, and then use that to get more buy-in. It's going to be a tougher battle on some of the other devices.
Yeah. Wicked. Well, I think that summarises it absolutely perfectly. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Pete. Where can people find out a little bit more about yourself and a little bit more about Moz?
We are at moz.com, moz.com, and the Moz blog is a great place to start. And then I am usually on Twitter. I'm just dr_Pete on Twitter.
Fantastic. Wicked. Well, thank you so much for joining us there. That was an absolutely immense discussion, that. Thank you so much for taking the time. I think that we've covered a hell of a lot of ground we've never covered before on that. So thank you so much for all of your input, Pete. That was really appreciated.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Good to talk to you.
Wow. What an amazing conversation that was. God, that guy, man, he's just the vision and the knowledge. That is probably one of the people who I would invite to dinner out of my 4 people to invite to dinner. And we didn't share dinner just then, but that was the only thing missing from that conversation was a pint of beer and a steak. So that was unbelievable. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Pete, for joining us. Wow, that guy's knowledge of Google and how the whole thing hangs together and you know how Google Home processes search results, how the whole of Google's turning into more of a device agnostic organization, which we've actually touched on in other podcasts. We think about the one, I think it was number 5 or so, with Matt Hartman from BetaWorks. He was suggesting that more and more companies are turning to that kind of model where they've got a centralized kind of brain, as he described it, and they then just feed stuff out to the various devices and various modalities based on the user's requirements. And that seems to be, from what Pete was saying, the way that Google are moving as well. Loads of insights in there for search marketers is the phrase that Pete was using quite often, and that's obviously still the case, but there'll be loads of people, I think, listening to this who are wondering how Google Home and Google Assistant work in terms of being able to answer the questions that you have. And I think that he explained that perfectly. So there you go, to rank and to get your brand's question answered via voice on Google Assistant or Google Home, you need to invest in more traditional search engine optimization and then tweaking the way that you create and publish content and design content in a way that becomes more focused on answering your users' questions. Absolutely unbelievable episode that. Thank you so much, Pete, for joining us. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, see you later.